The revolution that never happened. A lament for a country that learned how to survive everything except its own history. By Elias Winter, August 9th, 2026. Read by an automated voice. There is something about the faces of Iran's rulers that has always bothered me. I do not mean that as physiognomy. I do not believe evil announces itself through the arrangement of a man's eyebrows, nor that cruelty can be diagnosed from a photograph. History has given us smiling murderers and severe-looking saints. But watch enough footage of Ruhollah Khomeini speaking, and then Ali Khamenei, and a certain emotional register becomes difficult to ignore. The tightened mouth, the suspicion, the grievance, the sense that the man addressing the country is somehow also offended by it. They rarely looked happy to me. More than that, they rarely looked at ease with life. There was always an enemy. America, Israel, the hypocrites, the seditionists, the Westoxicated, the corrupt, the liberals, the monarchists, the unbelievers, the improperly veiled girl, the writer, the student, the musician, the person who had misunderstood Islam, the person who had understood Islam incorrectly, the person who had understood Islam correctly but arrived at the wrong political conclusion. And somewhere behind all of them stood the Iranian citizen, requiring instruction. It made me wonder about something simpler than politics. How does a person live like this? How does a man authorize executions and then go home? Does he drink tea? Does he ask about a grandchild's fever? Does he pray? Does he lie in bed and encounter, even for a few seconds, the fact that another human being once begged not to die and that his government killed him anyway? I used to imagine conscience as a final barrier, something buried so deeply in the human animal that ideology could never fully reach it. I am less certain now. Perhaps the most frightening thing about political cruelty is not that cruel men possess no conscience. It is that conscience can be reorganized. A man does not need to tell himself, "I am killing an innocent person." He can tell himself, "I am defending Islam. I am protecting the revolution. I am preserving the nation. I am defeating corruption. I am preventing chaos. I am doing what weaker men are too sentimental to do." The condemned person has to disappear first, not physically, but linguistically. He becomes a traitor, a spy, a hypocrite, an enemy of God, a counter-revolutionary, a terrorist, a foreign agent. Once the category is secure, the person becomes easier to kill. This is not particularly Iranian. Human beings have performed this operation everywhere, but Iran has endured it with an exhausting regularity. Kings did it without Islam. Revolutionaries did it without crowns. Modernizers did it in the name of progress. Clerics did it in the name of God. The justification changes. The dagger remains. The angry men. Perhaps this is why Iranian authority has so often carried the emotional texture of grievance. The ruler is powerful, but he speaks as though he is the injured party. He possesses the prisons, the army, the tax authority, the television stations, the courts, the police, and perhaps the oil beneath the ground. But still he is surrounded by enemies. He is betrayed. He is disrespected. He is undermined by foreigners. His generosity has been misunderstood. His reforms have been resisted. His religion has been insulted. His throne has been threatened. He possesses power and experiences himself as the victim. That combination is dangerous, because a ruler who experiences himself as both powerful and wronged can convert punishment into emotional justice. Iran has known many versions of this man. The Qajar Shah, surrounded by intrigue and provincial rivals. The Pahlavi monarch, convinced that backwardness and conspiracy were frustrating his national project. The revolutionary cleric convinced that a corrupt world had declared war upon Islam. The security official certain that an unveiled teenager is somehow participating in the designs of hostile powers. They are very different men, and their worlds should not be flattened into one another. But they inherit a remarkably durable assumption that those beneath them are not simply citizens with competing interests. They are material to be managed, corrected, protected, modernized, purified, educated, disciplined, or saved. The ruler knows. The population is known. Perhaps the deepest Iranian political wound begins there. The country of the dagger. Why did this happen so often? The answer cannot simply be that Iran was unlucky. One bad ruler may be an accident. Centuries of concentrated, suspicious, violent government require something closer to an ecology. Look at the land. Iran is a plateau broken by mountains, deserts, valleys, oases, and long distances. The Zagros rise in the west. The Alborz wall off the Caspian. Great arid expanses separate concentrations of settlement. Historically, water itself could determine where stable human life was possible. Before railways, highways, telecommunications, modern taxation, and bureaucratic records, governing such a place from one capital was extraordinarily difficult. A Shah in Tehran could issue an order. That did not mean a village hundreds of miles away would obey. So the ruler needed men, a governor, a tribal chief, a tax collector, a military commander, a local notable, a prince, someone who could turn distant royal intention into immediate physical reality. And what made such a man useful? Not his sensitivity to the people he governed. His usefulness was measured upward. Could he collect taxes? Could he keep the road open? Could he suppress revolt? Could he deliver soldiers? Could he prevent another faction from taking the province? Could he send money back to the center? A gentle official who failed at these tasks was ineffective. A brutal official who succeeded could be valuable. Thus begins an old political bargain. The center delegates coercion, the intermediary extracts what he can, the population survives between them. But the ruler also fears the intermediary. The same governor capable of controlling a province is capable of controlling it for himself. The same general who protects the throne can overthrow it. The same minister who makes the government work can become more popular than the sovereign. So the ruler watches the men he has empowered. He rotates them, humiliates them, confiscates their property, arranges marriages, uses spies, creates rival factions, sometimes kills them. Where institutions are weak, fear becomes administration. A modern state can communicate authority by issuing standardized rules through a professional bureaucracy. A weaker state can communicate authority through a body. Everyone hears what happened to the rebellious governor. Everyone understands what it means when property is seized. Everyone learns from the man who disappeared. Terror is crude, but it is legible. The dagger substitutes for the institution. Iran eventually acquired ministries, railways, universities, oil fields, telephones, intelligence agencies, fighter jets, databases, and nuclear scientists. But an older reflex survived beneath all this modernity. When control becomes uncertain, reach for punishment. How the country kills its better men. There is a particular tragedy in systems built around personal power. Competence can become threatening. Iran offers almost too perfect an example in Amir Kabir. He rose in the 19th century under Nasser al-Din Shah and attempted something Iran desperately needed: a more rational state, fiscal discipline, administrative reform, education, reduction of court waste, the building of institutions that might function beyond the appetites of courtiers. He was exactly the sort of man a fragile country should have protected. Instead, he became dangerous. He had stature. He had judgment. He had enemies. He did not depend entirely upon the whims of the people whose privileges he was dismantling. Eventually, the Shah dismissed him. Then Amir Kabir was killed in the bathhouse at Finn. His veins were opened. A country does not experience such a killing only once. Every ambitious official watching learns from it. Do not become Amir Kabir. Do not become so competent that the ruler discovers he needs you. Do not become so independent that he suspects you might survive without him. Do not accumulate too much respect. Do not make too many enemies among those who live from dysfunction. Know when to flatter. Know when not to speak. Know what the sovereign wants to hear before he asks. 80 years later, under an entirely different dynasty committed to modernizing the state, another highly capable man named Abdul Hossein Temurtash rose beside Reza Shah. He became enormously influential. He served the new monarchy and helped consolidate its power. Then he too became dangerous. He was imprisoned. He died in prison. Different Shah, different century, different ideology, same lesson. Iran did not merely lose talented men. It educated the survivors in how not to resemble them. This is how a political system develops an intelligence problem. The honest official disappears first, perhaps literally, perhaps merely from influence. The cautious official remains. The flatterer advances. The mediocre loyalist becomes safer than the brilliant independent subordinate. Then the ruler looks around and discovers that everyone agrees with him. He interprets this as evidence of wisdom. It is actually evidence of fear. Bad news stops moving upward. Good news becomes exaggerated. Policies survive long after they have failed, because nobody wants to be identified with the failure. Eventually, the man at the top may possess more information than anyone in the country, and know less about reality than the people standing in line for bread. Change the crown for a turban, and the subordinate still learns the same survival skill. Find out what truth is permitted before speaking. The foreigner at the gate. Iran has also had the misfortune of existing where it exists. Geography is not destiny, but it has a cruel sense of humor. Iran sits between worlds. Mesopotamia lies to the west, Central Asia and the great Eurasian steppe corridors to the northeast, the Caucasus above, India beyond the east, the Persian Gulf below. Trade routes cross it. Armies do too. The roads that bring civilization bring conquest. Alexander came. Arab armies came. Turkic peoples came. The Mongols came. Timur came. Afghan armies came. Russia came down through the Caucasus. Britain arrived from the south and through imperial pressure. Ottoman armies crossed the western frontiers. Saddam Hussein invaded in 1980. Now, once again, Iranian families listen for aircraft. There are nations protected by oceans. Iran was given crossroads. The same geography that allowed Persian civilization to become one of the great synthesizers of Eurasia made Iranian territory a prize whenever neighboring systems became powerful enough to move. Khorasan illustrates the bargain almost perfectly. It became one of the great intellectual and commercial regions of the medieval world, precisely because roads passed through it. Ideas traveled there. Merchants traveled there. Scholars traveled there. Religions traveled there. And so did Mongol cavalry. A road has no moral preference regarding what moves along it. There is something unbearable in reading accounts of cities like Nishapur, Merv, Herat, Ray, Isfahan, Tabriz, cities that appear repeatedly in history as centers of trade, art, scholarship, administration, and then suddenly as sites of siege, massacre, famine, occupation, or ruin. The Mongol invasion remains the great wound. Medieval chroniclers gave numbers so enormous that historians cannot accept them literally, but one does not need the impossible numbers to understand the scale. Cities were destroyed, populations were killed or displaced, irrigation systems failed, skilled communities vanished, human worlds accumulated over generations were erased in days. Then, eventually, life returned. This is the Iranian rhythm that begins to feel less inspiring the longer one thinks about it. Destruction, recovery, destruction, recovery. We praise the resilience because we have to. But resilience is a virtue imposed by catastrophe. No child should need to become resilient to an invading army. No civilization should have to prove its greatness by repeatedly surviving people who destroy it. The foreigner inside the palace. And yet Iran performed one of history's stranger acts of revenge. It absorbed many of its conquerors. The conqueror arrived militarily victorious and, within generations, commissioned Persian poetry. Turkic dynasties governed through Persian bureaucratic traditions. Mongol descendants patronized Persian historians and artists. Islam conquered Iran, but Iranian civilization profoundly reshaped Islam in return. Persian survived. Navruz survived. The memory of ancient Iran survived. Ferdowsi rebuilt a civilizational memory in verse after political sovereignty had disappeared. The conqueror entered Persia. Persia entered the conqueror. This makes it too simple to say that Iran has always been ruled by foreigners. Many dynasties began in tribal, Turkic, Central Asian, or other peripheral military environments and became thoroughly Iranian. The Islamic Republic itself is not a foreign occupation in any literal ethnic sense. Its rulers were born in Iran. Its soldiers are Iranian. Its prisons are staffed by Iranians. And yet, governments can become foreign without crossing a border. Foreignness can describe a relationship. The ruler looks at the country and sees an object, a population to remake, a land to possess, a culture to discipline, a history to reinterpret, a woman whose clothing must symbolize his vision of national virtue, a young man whose music is either acceptable or corrupting, a writer whose thought must be measured against the needs of the state. At that point, the government may be indigenous and still feel like an occupation. The citizen hears, "You live here, but I will tell you what this place means." This, perhaps, is what has made so many Iranian governments feel strangely estranged from Iran itself. They love Iran as idea. They have often been much less comfortable with Iranians as people. The woman and the state. Reza Shah believed Iran needed modernization. He was not entirely wrong. The country he inherited was fragmented, poor, institutionally weak, deeply vulnerable to foreign intervention, and technologically behind the powers surrounding it. He built roads, he built a national army, he strengthened bureaucracy, he expanded secular education, he attacked old structures that had limited the state's ability to function, and then, in the name of modernization, he decided how women should dress. The veil came off by order. Decades later, a revolution overthrew his son. The veil went back on by order. The symmetry should embarrass everybody. One government looked at the Iranian woman and said, "You will reveal your hair because modern Iran requires it." Another looked at the same woman and said, "You will cover your hair because Islamic Iran requires it." The ideologies are opposite. The political sentence is identical. Your body belongs partly to my idea of the nation. This may be the most concise illustration of Iran's recurring political failure. Reza Shah could genuinely believe he was liberating women while denying a woman the right to refuse his liberation. The Islamic Republic could genuinely believe it was protecting women while punishing women who did not want its protection. The ruler's certainty swallows the citizen. This is why good intentions do not solve the problem of power. The question is not only what the ruler wants. The question is, what prevents him from forcing it upon you? What the dagger teaches the house. It would be comforting to tell Iranian history as a story in which innocent people were continuously betrayed by terrible rulers and foreigners. It would also be incomplete. Political systems do things to the people living inside them. They teach. If rules are arbitrary, obeying them literally can make you a fool. If connections determine outcomes, cultivate connections. If officials can destroy your life, never confront them unnecessarily. If public speech is dangerous, develop two vocabularies, one for strangers and one for the kitchen table. If property can be confiscated, keep some wealth portable. If institutions cannot be trusted, trust family. If telling the truth upward is punished, learn to tell powerful people what they want to hear. If you are humiliated by the person above you and cannot answer him, perhaps you recover some dignity by asserting yourself over the person below. Hierarchy travels downward. The boss humiliates the employee. The bureaucrat humiliates the applicant. The father humiliates the child. The officer humiliates the conscript. The wealthy man humiliates the servant. Everyone is sovereign over somebody. These are not uniquely Iranian behaviors. They appear wherever arbitrary power persists. But they become social habits, and after enough time, the habit can outlive the condition that originally produced it. This is where the question of self-government becomes painful. Democracy is not merely a constitution. It asks people to practice behaviors that authoritarian history often punishes. Trust someone you disagree with. Accept that your faction may lose. Follow a rule even when you could use a connection to avoid it. Allow your enemy to speak. Permit a government you dislike to govern until the next election. Believe that surrendering power today will not result in your destruction tomorrow. Tell a superior the truth without assuming he will take revenge. Treat a public institution as something that belongs to everybody, rather than as spoils captured temporarily by your tribe. Those are not natural human behaviors. They are learned. Iran has repeatedly had openings in which people tried to learn them. The constitutional revolution, parliamentary politics, civil society, newspapers, reform movements, elections that briefly seemed meaningful. Then the school closes. Parliament is bombarded. A coup occurs. A monarch recentralizes. A revolution devours its allies. A newspaper is banned. A candidate is disqualified. A protest becomes sedition. Another generation learns the old lesson. Power is real. Procedure is temporary. This is how a society can desire freedom intensely while remaining poorly trained for the mundane habits that keep freedom alive. That is not a racial defect. It is not an Oriental essence. It is history becoming behavior. And the behavior then becomes part of history. The country that went inside. Perhaps this is why Iran became so good at interior life. When public life is dangerous, intelligence retreats somewhere power has difficulty following. Into metaphor, the household, humor, mysticism, poetry, gardens, food, private parties, the second meaning of a sentence. Persian poetry is full of doors that open onto other doors. Wine may be wine. Wine may be divine intoxication. The beloved may be a person. The beloved may be God. The preacher may be a hypocrite. The tyrant may be a king. The king may be fate. Ambiguity becomes more than aesthetics. It becomes freedom of movement. A censor can punish a sentence more easily than a metaphor. A ruler can command the body more completely than the imagination. The state can occupy the square. It cannot entirely occupy Hafez. And so, a strange civilization develops, enormously sophisticated in private, frequently impoverished in public. At home, people laugh. They mock everything. They argue about poetry. They flirt. They dance. They cook dishes requiring absurd amounts of labor. They arrange herbs beside bread and cheese. They spend 20 minutes refusing to allow the other person to pay. They place fruit in front of a guest, as though the honor of the family depends upon the quality of the peach. Then the television turns on, and somebody is shouting about enemies. There is a painful split between these two Irans. One is tender, sensual, skeptical, funny, tired, poetic. The other is official. The official Iran has always been much louder, but I am not sure it has ever been stronger. The Shahnameh survived kings who could have had Ferdowsi executed. Hafez survives governments that would probably be irritated by half his verses. The Islamic Republic has enormous coercive power, and still cannot persuade Iranians not to celebrate a pre-Islamic Spring Festival by placing sprouts, apples, vinegar, garlic, coins, and poetry on a table. This is a tiny victory. It is also unbearably sad that victories had to become this small. The revolution that changed the costume. In 1905, government agents punished sugar merchants in Tehran. It sounds almost trivial compared with the revolutions that followed. Prices had risen. Officials wanted someone blamed. Merchants were bastinadoed. But sometimes history changes because humiliation suddenly becomes intolerable. The bazaar closed. People protested. A movement formed. Eventually, Iranians began demanding something more radical than a kinder monarch. They demanded law, qanun, a parliament, a constitution, something between the citizen and the ruler, something the ruler himself would have to obey. This may have been the most revolutionary idea in modern Iranian history precisely because it was so unromantic. Not a prophet, not a heroic king, not a savior, procedure, rules, limits. Muhammad Ali Shah eventually answered the modules with artillery. The image contains almost the entire tragedy. The old order literally fired cannon at the institution intended to limit it. The constitutional revolution survived him, but the constitutional principle never became secure enough to become boring. Iran would later turn toward the strong man. Reza Khan arrived in a country exhausted by fragmentation and weakness. His rise made sense. People living amid disorder do not necessarily dream first of procedural elegance. They dream of trains running, roads being safe, armies obeying a center, taxes being collected predictably, foreigners being kept at a distance. The strong man's bargain is always seductive because he solves real problems. Then the problems he solves become arguments for powers he should not possess. His son inherited a more centralized country and eventually imagined an Iran of extraordinary grandeur. Modern industries, advanced weapons, great universities, enormous infrastructure, a civilization restored to its rightful place. Mohammad Reza Shah loved a certain vision of Iran. I am less certain that he understood the difference between loving a country and allowing its people to disagree with your vision of it. That is the authoritarian's recurring confusion. I love the nation. Therefore, I know what the nation needs. Therefore, resistance to me is resistance to the nation. The revolution of 1979 promised to end this. For a moment, nearly everybody seemed to be in the street. liberals, Islamists, leftists, nationalists, students, clerics, workers, middle-class families, people who shared almost nothing except the conviction that the existing political order could no longer continue. The Shah left. Political prisoners emerged. History seemed open. Then slowly, the space narrowed. The monarchy disappeared. Political possession did not. The Shah had said, "I know what modern Iran requires." Khomeini said, "I know what God requires." The source of certainty changed. The relationship between ruler and ruled survived. The revolution happened. The revolution did not happen. The rule of the righteous. There is something especially dangerous about political power when it no longer experiences itself as political. A king may know he is governing. A theocrat can believe he is obeying. That difference matters. If I order punishment because I want power, some part of me must confront my own ambition. If I order punishment because God requires justice, my conscience can join the prosecution. Khomeini did not invent religious certainty. Nor does Islam uniquely produce political violence. Islamic civilization has contained every imaginable relationship between religion and authority, including long traditions of skepticism toward rulers and restraint regarding clerical government. But Khomeini gave one particular Shia theory extraordinary political force. The jurist would not merely advise the state, he would guard it. And when guardianship becomes sovereignty, political disagreement can acquire cosmic significance. Now, the opponent is not simply mistaken. He can become an enemy of the divine order. This helps explain something I once found incomprehensible about executions. How can they sleep? Perhaps because they do not experience themselves as murderers. Perhaps the internal sentence is, "I did what weak men would not. I defended the revolution. I protected Islam. I prevented corruption. I carried a burden." Perhaps he prays afterward. Perhaps the prayer comforts him. This possibility frightens me more than psychopathy. A psychopath knows nothing. The righteous executioner knows too much. He knows exactly why God agrees with him. The country between two demons. And now Iran is at war again. The details are new. The structure feels ancient. There is a government inside the country that has imprisoned, executed, censored, beaten, and humiliated its own population while claiming to defend Iranian sovereignty. There are powerful states outside the country willing to use extraordinary violence against Iran while describing that violence in the language of security, deterrence, necessity, liberation, prevention, strategy. Between them are Iranians. This is the position Iran has occupied too often, trapped between rulers who weaponize the foreign threat and foreigners whose actions strengthen the ruler's story. The government says, "You must tolerate us because the enemy is at the gate." The enemy arrives at the gate. The government says, "See? This does not make the government innocent. It makes the trap effective." There is an intellectual cruelty inflicted upon Iranians in moments like this. They are asked to simplify themselves. If you condemn the regime, perhaps you must celebrate whatever hurts it. If you condemn foreign attacks, perhaps you must secretly support the regime. If you love Iran, perhaps you are a nationalist. If you criticize Iranian political culture, perhaps you hate Iranians. If you acknowledge foreign intervention, perhaps you are making excuses for domestic tyranny. No. A country can be imprisoned by its rulers and still not belong to its liberators. Hatred of the Islamic Republic does not require indifference to what happens to Iran. Love of Iran does not require defending the Islamic Republic. The Iranian citizen should not have to choose which demon is entitled to treat him as material. And perhaps this is why the future feels so sad to me now. It is not simply fear of bombs, it is fear of repetition. A central order weakens. Outside powers intervene. Internal factions sharpen. People become afraid. The country fragments politically. Everyone demands security. Eventually, another man appears promising order. He asks for extraordinary powers temporarily. History applauds. The dagger finds another hand. Why don't they leave? And still, people stay. This is what I cannot stop thinking about. When danger comes, many Iranians leave a neighborhood. They leave Tehran. They go north. They sleep at a cousin's house. They move children away from a target. They pack documents. They make contingency plans. Some cross borders. Some emigrate permanently. Iran has already lost extraordinary numbers of educated people across decades. Doctors, engineers, scientists, writers, students, entrepreneurs, people who concluded that the life they wanted could more easily be built somewhere else. Yet there remains a powerful difference between escaping danger and abandoning Iran. Why? After all of this, why stay? Perhaps because a country is not an argument. It is not its GDP, its constitution, the government building, or the flag hanging behind the man giving the speech. Home is accumulated sensation, a grandmother's kitchen, the mountain visible behind the city on a clear morning, a particular smell after rain, the language in which anger sounds correct, the joke that cannot be translated, a grave, a street, a childhood apartment, the exact rice crust somebody in the family knows how to make, the sound of people arguing over who should pay, Nowruz arriving again whether the government deserves spring or not. There are things migration cannot reproduce because their significance came from never having to explain them. This is why exile hurts, even when exile is materially comfortable. You can become safe somewhere else. You cannot automatically become unseparated. Iranian history is full of separation. People separated from governments they despise, but from a country they still love. People who cannot return. People who return and discover the country no longer exists in the form they carried. People whose children speak Persian with an accent. People who build beautiful lives elsewhere and still look at photographs of mountains. Perhaps this too is part of what centuries of invasion and political instability created. A culture unusually practiced at carrying home internally. The state may fail. The household must continue. What is nice about this country? After talking for so long about Iran's rulers, invasions, executions, prisons, coups, forced veils, forced unveiling, foreign armies, and failed revolutions, I eventually had to ask a childish question. What is nice about this country? Why mourn it? The answer came easier than everything else. Almost everything. The governments are the worst advertisements for Iran. There is Persian itself, capable of saying something devastating and affectionate in the same breath. There is Ferdowsi carrying an entire lost political universe through verse. There is Hafez refusing to let clerics possess God completely. There is Sadi imagining human beings as limbs of one body centuries before international institutions discovered the vocabulary of universalism. There are gardens built in dry places because water is too precious not to become beautiful. There is Isfahan. There is Shiraz. There are Caspian forests that look nothing like the Iran foreigners imagine. There are deserts in which silence becomes physical. There is the Alborz appearing above Tehran after the pollution clears. There is Gilan rain. There are pomegranates, saffron, tadig, around which entire families become irrational, tea poured into small glasses, the Iranian impulse to feed someone who has just said he is not hungry. There is Nowruz, perhaps especially Nowruz. The state changes. Islamic Republic, monarchy, dynasty, empire. Spring arrives anyway. Clean the house, grow something green, put sweetness on the table, visit people. Begin again. No ruler invented this. No ruler owns it. Perhaps that is why I find it moving. Iran has been governed by men obsessed with grandeur, purity, modernization, religion, sovereignty, empire, resistance. Ordinary Iranian civilization has often been concerned with smaller things. Make the rice correctly. Read the poem. Bring fruit. Tell the joke. Visit your mother. Set the table. Survive until spring. The rulers keep trying to become history. History mostly forgets them. The poem remains. A country I do not know how to hope for. I wish I could end this with confidence. I wish I believed suffering automatically teaches wisdom. It does not. History can teach people the wrong lessons. A nation invaded repeatedly can become paranoid. A population ruled arbitrarily can become distrustful. A society taught that losing power means destruction can reproduce politicians terrified of losing. People who survive through family networks can come to distrust public institutions. People forced to lie to authority can become skilled at lying. People humiliated from above can discover the temptation to humiliate downward. None of these are permanent characteristics, but they are real inheritances. This is why simply removing a ruler is not enough. Iran has removed rulers before. It has removed dynasties. It has overthrown kings. It has written constitutions. It has nationalized resources. It has had revolutions. It has changed flags. It has renamed streets and political institutions. It has exchanged the crown for the turban. And still, the deepest relationship has proved difficult to change. Someone stands above, someone stands below. Someone knows, someone obeys, someone saves, someone must be saved. Perhaps this is the revolution Iran has never had. Not the revolution of 1979, and not another revolution resembling it. Something less dramatic. The transformation of the subject into the citizen. A country where losing an election does not mean exile. Where disagreeing with the government does not require courage. Where the person in charge can be mocked without anybody disappearing. Where the defeated faction expects another election rather than a prison cell. Where a woman's hair carries no information about the legitimacy of the state. Where God does not require a police department. Where modernization does not require obedience. Where patriotism does not require worship. Where foreigners cannot plausibly claim that destroying the country is a form of saving its people. Where rulers leave office and live and perhaps become boring. It sounds so small compared with empire. That may be the tragedy. After Cyrus and Alexander, Qadisiyah and the Mongols, Safavid kings and Qajar princes, Russian armies and British intrigues, Reza Shah and Mossadegh, the Shah and Khomeini, revolution and war, martyrdom and exile, Iran's unreachable political dream may be something much less glorious. An ordinary Tuesday. A citizen wakes up late. He complains about the government. His wife disagrees with him. Their daughter wears whatever she wants. Parliament is arguing about some tedious budget. A newspaper insults the president. Nobody is arrested. Someone loses an election and gives a concession speech. The country survives. They eat dinner. Nothing historic happens. I think this is what saddens me most. For a civilization that has produced so much history, Perhaps what Iran has needed most is a little less of it. Less destiny, less salvation, less grandeur, less blood, less of the angry man explaining what the nation requires. More ordinary life. More time in which nobody comes through the door. More years that children do not later describe as the year of the revolution, the year of the coup, the year of the war, the year we left, the year they arrested him, the year the currency collapsed, the year the bombs came. Iran has proved that it can survive. I no longer find survival sufficiently beautiful. A prisoner survives. A refugee survives. A widow survives. A civilization can survive while losing generation after generation to fear, exile, frustration, war, and waiting. The question is whether Iran will ever be permitted something gentler than survival. I do not know. I look backward and see too many reasons for pessimism. The geography will not move. The neighborhood will not become harmless. Foreign powers will continue to have interests. Oil will continue to tempt the state away from accountability. Old habits will not disappear because one government falls. The culture itself will have to learn forms of trust that history repeatedly punished. The next ruler will have to resist becoming another father. The next opposition will have to accept that victory does not confer ownership. None of this is guaranteed. That is why I cannot end by saying that Iran will be free. I can only say that freedom would require something Iran has repeatedly approached and repeatedly lost. The ruler would have to discover that the country is not his. The revolutionary would have to discover that victory does not make the country his. The cleric would have to discover that God does not make the country his. The general would have to discover that protecting the country does not make the country his. The foreign power would have to discover that opposing Iran's government does not make Iran available for redesign. And Iranians themselves would have to discover that no faction, class, ethnicity, ideology, dynasty, diaspora, or generation can possess the country either. Iran belongs to nobody in that sense. That is precisely why it can belong to everyone who calls it home. For centuries, someone has been arriving with a dagger and an explanation. A conqueror, a shah, a revolutionary, a cleric, a soldier, a liberator. Each says that history has placed Iran in his hands. Perhaps the revolution that never happened will begin when an Iranian finally looks at the man holding the dagger and asks the simplest question in the country's long history. Who told you it was yours? Elias Winter, author of Language Matters, a space for reflection on language, power, and decline.